And like, are there any like specific feminist things that like clash with being Jewish?
There's nothing for me that I think clashes with being Jewish. What's challenging is that as a feminist, I have what's called a hermeneutic of suspicion when I read Jewish sources, meaning that I may read them as important, I may read them as interesting, I may read them as having an impact on my life, but I tend not to read them as definitely authoritative because I assume that those sources are going to contain sexism and that I have to contend with that as a Jew. And that makes it a little challenging sometimes to be a Jew committing to Jewish practice, and reading Torah to feel that and know that. But I don't consider it an ultimate contradiction. I just consider it a challenge.
Okay. And so what do you think like makes some people uncomfortable with like identifying as a feminist?
Do you mean in general or in the Jewish community?
Let's say both.
Okay. In general, I mean, actually, really, in some ways, the answer is the same. I think sort of the anti-feminist crowd kind of successfully, in some ways, painted feminists as, as shrill people who don't want to have any fun, who want to, who dislike men and, sometimes, who dislike family life. And I think there was kind of a successful campaign to discredit feminists, in ways that were really not fair. So that's part of it. I think that people feel that if they call themselves feminists, that people will think that they don't like men or that, they're going to be sort of angry all the time. And that stuff, I think people should just, shift their attitude. The other thing that I think makes people uncomfortable is that being a feminist does mean that you challenge a lot of existing social systems. And for people who are committed to those social systems, it's kind of scary. And just to put that in a Jewish context, if you're someone, who believes in the, who believes that, Judaism is the best way to live, and a feminist comes along and says, well, look at this and this and this, and, these practices are not, fair to women or not good for women. That means that the entire system has to be reevaluated. That's very scary for people, and sometimes they really don't want to deal with it, or don't want to, or they are upset by the people who raise that critique. And so I think that also sometimes makes people not want to call themselves feminists.
Okay, and so that's interesting. So what inspired you to become a feminist? Was it something like whether just sorry, I'm trying to think of the word.
Okay.
So was there something like that you read in the Torah that made you think maybe this isn't right, or was there just something else that didn't have to do with being Jewish?
I mean, my evolution as a feminist grew over time. I think that I really became a committed feminist in college when I began to encounter versions of Judaism in which women did not have equal ritual participation, where women weren't allowed to lead services, or they, weren't supposed to be religious leaders. That wasn't the Judaism I'd grown up with. I was pretty upset by it when I, really saw what it meant in community. And that the other, and a writer, and a feminist writer, which in some ways is, is an important part of my life. The other thing that I think I was also inspired by other feminists, by feminists who were writing poetry, who were writing critiques of the Bible, who were writing political critiques. I was inspired by those people, reading them in college. Like writers like Alicia Ostreicher and Marge Piercy had a huge influence on me. And I guess the last thing was that when I got to rabbinical school and I began seriously studying Jewish text, I realized how endemic the view of women really was. It was everywhere, in many, many texts that I read. In some way, there was, the view of women was part of that text. And it just felt to me like I could not possibly ignore that. and still feel happy about my Judaism, that I had to address that.